morning. It is Saturday, March the 19th, and this is The Drill. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have no free lunch, and we will continue with Chapter 1 from the book called Shadowbosses, about public employee unions. All that and more when I get back. Thank you. And now the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for March the 19th. You will command mountains to be removed. If you have faith in my power at work in your life, you will be able to command any mountain that rises up against me or my power in you to fall into the sea. Stand firm in your faith, for many will say in their hearts that they want to ascend to heaven. They will try to establish their throne above the tops of the clouds so that they may be like the Most High. But with my power at work in you, you will bring them down to the depths of the pit. In the last days, the mountain of my holy temple will be established as chief among the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and all nations will stream into it. Many peoples will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths." Psalm 65, Matthew 21, verses 21 through 22. Prayer Declaration. I speak to every mountain in my life and command it to be removed and cast into the sea. I speak to every financial mountain to be removed from my life in Jesus' name. Let every evil mountain hear the voice of the Lord and be removed. Let the mountains tremble at the presence of God. Lord, you are against every destroying mountain. Make waste the evil mountains in my life, O Lord. Amen. And that was the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for March the 19th. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is religious and realistic. He is the person that understands that culture is the foundation for politics. He acknowledges a benevolent universe. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. Thank you, thank you. What are the tactics in support of the strategy to rid America of socialist influence? The long-term tactics are to be a true conservative, talk like a conservative, act like a conservative, dress like a conservative, and think like a conservative. The short-term tactics are rhetorical. True conservatives need to win all of the arguments. That means don't prove a negative. Don't take their word for it. Don't be neutral, and ask plenty of questions. Thank you, thank you. What is the true conservative strategy for defeating socialists in this country? Socialists must be driven from positions of power, and since it is lefty counterculture that provides the foundation for their political success, true conservatives must resist left-wing counterculture and promote normal American culture. By changing our culture, we will change our politics. And by changing the culture, we mean you need to get married, have a family, and raise your children. Thank you, thank you. What are the true conservative political priorities? Number 1, the abolition of abortion throughout the land. Number 2, to make nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons obsolete. Number 3, the immediate decertification of all public employee unions. Number 4, the immediate assignment of criminal and civil liabilities to all government regulators. Number 5, the immediate repeal of the so-called Patriot Act. Number 6, the immediate repeal of all so-called emergency dictator laws. Thank you, thank you. And now there's no free lunch. I prefer true but imperfect knowledge, even if it leaves much undetermined and unpredictable, to a pretense of exact knowledge that is likely to be false. F.A. Hayek. No perfect knowledge is possible in the comprehensive sense on this side of glory, and yet individuals operating with freedom and agency do not assert exact knowledge and can freely operate within the constraints of what they know they do not know. Central authorities asserting decision-making control presupposes knowledge they do not have, and worse, make us suffer the consequences where they are wrong. And that was, there's no free lunch. Thank you, thank you. And now, Chapter 1, continuing with Chapter 1 of Shadowbosses, and the section's called Government Service Lifestyle. Government workers must work harder than workers in the private sector for all that extra pay and benefits, right? You decide. A news team investigation in Pittsburgh tracked edits to Wikipedia, the open source website where anyone can log in to change facts about events, people, and objects. The news team found thousands of edits done by government employees on government time using government computers, and few of those edits have anything to do with government business. What were these intrepid scholars up to? They were editing the Wikipedia pages for Steelers quarterback Ben Roethlisberger, singer Beyoncé, and James Bond. One employee edited the profile for Lurch, the butler on the Addams Family. He added the valuable information that Lurch didn't actually play the harpsichord. Another employee wrote a full plot summary for a Star Wars TV series. Overall, the news team found 1,536 edits by state employees and 5,542 edits by federal offices. And as the news team pointed out, Wikipedia is just one website. Even if these wiki employees are an aberration, we do know that government employees tend to be in the office less often than workers in businesses. Federal employees get a whopping 13 days of sick leave, 10 federal holidays, and up to 26 additional days of vacation for a total of up to 49 days of paid time off per year. Because unions encourage their workers to use all their sick days as holidays instead of just when they actually get sick, government workers get the equivalent of up to 10 paid weeks of vacation per year. That's equal to working a 4-day work week every week. How would your business do with you gone that much? There are lots of other benefits of working for the government too. According to Steve Greenhut in his book Plunder, drivers of one out of every 22 cars on California roads have special license plates whereby their addresses are kept secret from toll agencies and parking enforcement agencies. When an officer pulls someone over with one of these plates, the addresses are in a special database that alerts the officer that the driver is a government worker or fellow police officer or a family member of someone in law enforcement or government work. The result is a de facto pass on many, if not most, traffic laws by the drivers. If working for the government can get you out of a speeding ticket, what can't it do? And my own personal experience of this is that I worked for a short period of time for the city of Pasadena, and I had a Pasadena city ID, and I was pulled over by a Pasadena police officer who was investigating me for a traffic violation. He pulled me over, and we started to converse. When he saw my ID, he said, "Oh, you work for the city?" And then he waved his hand and said, "You have a nice day." So I have personal experience with that. Back to the book. On the downside, though, most union contracts prevent government workers from getting paid extra for good performance, although some government employees do get extra bonuses in the form of performance awards. So if you don't feel like having your performance evaluated but still want to earn good pay and retire early with great benefits, the government sector is for you. But if you want to be paid based on your performance, try the private sector. This may explain why you have a harder and harder time getting people at the Social Security Bureau or the Department of Motor Vehicles to hustle to serve you. After all, they understand what you may not. They don't work for you, you work for them. Your job is to keep making the pie so that the government employee unions and their next tax receiver team can eat more of it. Now, get back to work. Government unions rising. Unions were on the endangered species list by the 1960s and 70s. Then, like most real-life endangered species, they found their great protector, the government. Now unions are flourishing, and they are threatening all the other species in our political ecosystem. Of the 125 million people working in America, only about 13% are represented by a union. But out of the 20.5 million people working for our government, 41% are represented by a government employee union. 1 in 3 federal workers, 35% of state government workers, and almost 47% of local government workers are represented by a government employee union. In the more heavily unionized states, government employee unionization rates can be as high as 60 to 70%. More than 2 in 3 public school teachers are unionized. About 2 in 3 police officers and firefighters are unionized. And 1 in 2 corrections officers are unionized. In the private sector, unions are still on the endangered list and still declining every year. Less than 7% of all private sector workers are union members. Workers in America's businesses seem to have decided that whatever benefits a union brings, they are not worth the cost. But in the government sector, unions are flourishing. Millions of government employees join unions. Of course, many government employees in forced dues states join the union because they have to pay union dues anyway. But over 1 million federal employees are members of a government employee union, even though these workers can't be compelled to financially support a union. And to a much lesser extent, some government employees in right-to-work states who also can't be forced to pay union dues still join a union. All government employees rushing into the unions must be getting something important for the expensive dues that they pay their union. But what? They're keeping their lucrative jobs even when common sense would dictate that these jobs should be cut. The unions are protecting them from being displaced by technology and greater efficiency in the workplace. Back in a minute. Thank you. Protecting the dinosaurs. Unions protect government workers against their own obsolescence. To see how, look at the U.S. Postal Service, a branch of our government that employs about 750,000 workers, including 574,000 heavily unionized career postal workers. The Postal Service has far more employees than any corporation in America except Walmart. A public relations pamphlet from the post office boasts, if it were a private sector company, the U.S. Postal Service would rank 29th in the 2010 Fortune 500, a ranking based on gross revenue. Of course, if the Postal Service were really a private sector company, it would have been out of business a long time ago. Despite investing up to $2.7 billion annually in capital investments on new mail processing equipment and other equipment designed to increase efficiency, your mail service is not getting more efficient. Perhaps this is because postal managers sometimes keep using obsolete mechanical equipment even when automatic equipment was available, just to keep workers from standing around idle. Or it may be because postal union contracts prohibit the Postal Service from reassigning idle workers to facilities that actually need them. Even as the Postal Service was losing $8.5 billion in 2010, with that much cash you could actually buy Chrysler, the confident president of the American Postal Workers Union still said that he was fighting for more control over activities at work, more money, better benefits. We want more. More. Similarly, while many countries in the world transformed their air traffic control system using global positioning system technology over a decade ago, our Air Traffic Controllers Union is still resisting this new technology. Wait, you protest. Air Traffic Controllers Union? Didn't President Reagan hand those guys their heads in the early 80s? Yes, but like a zombie buried prematurely, the union hand reached out from the grave. Just a few years later, air traffic controllers reunionized and elected the National Air Traffic Controllers Association as their exclusive representative. Why? Because they needed the union to protect their jobs against improved technology, making many air traffic control jobs obsolete. We all rely on GPS today to find the best route, even to keep a virtual eye on where our friends are via Facebook and collect badges at our favorite coffee bar via Foursquare. Why is our air traffic control system ignoring GPS and still handing off aircraft from tower to tower across the country using radar, more or less the same way we did when John F. Kennedy was president? It's because a GPS-based system requires significantly fewer controllers to do the same job, and union bosses prefer to stick with the old system. So long as unions have friends in high places in our government, flying in the United States will be more expensive and less efficient than in all those other countries that use GPS. And how did the union handle it when national news media reported incidences of air traffic controllers falling asleep on the job, putting planes and passengers' lives in jeopardy? The union negotiated with the Federal Aviation Administration for the perfect solution. For each shift, it required that another air traffic controller be placed on duty to make sure that the first air traffic controller doesn't fall asleep, and actually allowed controllers to listen to the radio and read on the job to help keep themselves awake. If that doesn't work, undoubtedly the unions can propose an air traffic controller watcher, and so on. In government, we all know who the dinosaurs are. Some postal workers, air traffic controllers, and pencil pushers. These are the people who would lose if the unions were kicked out and the government streamlined itself. And the winners would be us, the taxpayers. But we are dispersed and not fully aware of what the unions and our government are up to. Most of us still believe that we're flying pretty safe and getting our mail more or less on time. But by the same token, when we really need a package delivered quickly, we bypass the postal service and take a stroll down to non-unionized FedEx instead. Buying the government. Government employee unions use campaign contributions and political support to influence government decision makers at all levels of government. Using this very friendly and effective method of persuasion, the government employee unions can get Congress to give them more federal workers to unionize, persuade states to force more workers to pay dues to them, and ensure that other elected officials go easy on them in contract negotiations. Political activity was not as important to the private sector unions because politicians couldn't generally affect the union's bottom line as directly. But buying political influence, legal bribery, works perfectly for government employee unions. After all, it is the government that determines whether these unions will be able to represent new groups of government employees. So it makes sense for unions to invest their money in putting their friends in government. These unions run like smoothly oiled machines, and they argue that nobody gets hurt by their political influence. Except the American pie maker, that is. Back in a minute. Thank you. The real 1%. What do government employee unions do with all that dues money that they earn off the backs of government workers and American taxpayers? They pay the Shadowbosses first, of course. While former SEIU President Andy Stern lamented the fact that people sometimes think being a union leader is a right or an inheritance, the truth is that the Shadowbosses themselves think that being a union boss is a right. Stern himself drew $306,388 in compensation in 2009 before stepping down in 2010. Being a shadow boss is like being a director of a third world country. Once you've got power, you don't step down willingly, and you take as much as you can while you're in office. Gerald McEntee, the president of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, makes $555,367. AFSCME's former International Secretary-Treasurer, William Lucy, took home $847,810 in salary alone in 2010. AFSCME had 16 executives at the national headquarters who made in excess of $200,000 per year, and almost half its headquarters employees made over $75,000 in 2010. There are many more union officials earning high salaries at the state and local level, although this information is much harder to come by. In contrast, the average AFSCME member makes less than $45,000 per year. Dennis Van Rokel, president of the National Education Administration, makes almost $400,000. Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers, makes over $425,000 in salary annually, almost 10 times what an average teacher earns. And over half the union officials at the headquarters of the two teachers' unions make over $75,000 a year. Even a pro-labor commentator complained about bloated union boss salaries. With union members everywhere getting squeezed by employers, fat salaries for top officials only widen the gap between elected leaders and the rank and file. The left, including the unions, proclaims that it's unfair for Wall Street executives to make huge salaries and the 1% are living off the rest of us. But the true 1% includes the union bosses who rake in the money, dine at the White House, and live it up on the backs of their members. By any measure, workers should be striking against the union bosses themselves. Government's where it's at, and the government employee unions have one goal: grow government, unionize more government workers, and charge the bill to the taxpayers. and that's just what's happened. Anytime you see potential government growth, you should suspect that the government employee unions are behind it. Where do government employee unions come from? If you were hired today as a police officer in California, a teacher in New York, or as a government bureaucrat in Illinois, you would be told that there is a specific union that will represent you in matters with your employer. You will also be told that you are paying dues or fees to that union for the privilege of representation. And if you refuse to pay these union tithes, you will be fired. Simple enough. But how did that union get all this power? Clearly, you have no say in the matter. But what about old Joe, who's been here for the last 20 years? It turns out he doesn't know how the union got there either. It was here when he was hired. Old Joe never voted to bring in the union or to keep it there. It just seems that the union has always been there since the dawn of time. Actually, most government employee unions gained control over government workers sometime in the 60s or early 70s, when many states passed laws allowing monopoly collective bargaining over government workers. A state might have done this because it was a trend sweeping the nation at the time. All the cool states were doing it. Or, more likely, the unions had made enough pro-labor union friends in the legislature and had supported the governor in his election to make it happen. Now, unions exercise collective bargaining power over at least some state and local government workers in 43 states, plus the District of Columbia. In any case, when these laws were first passed, a bunch of different labor unions made a beeline for your state, like flies to honey, and tried to unionize every group of government workers in sight. First, the unions as a group would have had to convince at least 30% of the workers in a bargaining group, say the police officers in San Diego County, to sign cards asking the state to hold a union election. Once the unions had collected enough cards, the state held a secret ballot election. That is when it got ugly. For a few weeks or months, the various unions fought tooth and nail and kneecap for every last worker, spending hundreds of dollars per worker trying to get their vote. When the election was held, whichever union won the majority of votes from police officers voting in the election was certified as the representative for all police officers in the county. The other unions licked their wounds and went away to organize other workers in other jurisdictions. What if you voted against the union because you wanted to be able to negotiate your own pay and benefits individually with the department? Too bad. The union became your exclusive representative, too. Back in a minute. Thank you. Union contracts. The newly installed union would now negotiate detailed contracts with the county or locality. The first contract would be a union security contract, giving the union power to represent workers and collect dues. The second contract would cover employment terms for the officers. The union's highest priority in negotiating its own contract is always a forced dues provision that allows the union to collect dues and fees from every worker it represents, union member or not. This is the gold mine that fuels the government employee union movement. The representative workers aren't forced to actually join the union, but even if they don't join, they are forced to pay agency fees to the union, which unions more gently call fair share fees. Because the non-member fees are the same or almost the same as union dues, most workers join the union. With union membership, you get some extra insurance coverage, some other benefits, and most of all, the union thug outside your office door or hovering over your cubicle will go away. So if you can't beat them, you may as well join them. For unions, forced dues contracts are home run. They get to extract money from your wallet without your permission or say so. Forced dues provisions are permitted in 27 states and in union contracts in at least 22 states. Generally, more than 3/4 of the dues income that government worker unions collect is from forced dues states. In fact, over half the union's total dues income comes from just 6 states: California, New York, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New Jersey. So what services does the union provide you in exchange for your dues? The union gets between you and your employer in matters involving your job. Your union negotiates an employment contract that controls every aspect of your working life, from how much salary you get to how early you can retire, from how much vacation you can get every year to how many bathroom breaks you can take every day. The union representatives will also handle any complaints that you have against your employer or your employer may have against you, and on and on. You will not generally deal with your employer on matters concerning your employment, only via the union representative. If you have a fight with your boss, instead of sitting down with your boss directly, you get your union representative. Your boss gets his lawyer, and they have a chat. And the union gets some goodies too. The government must pay union officials for the time that they spend on union matters, called official time or release time, and give the union the right to be present physically in your government workplace, to keep other unions out of your workplace, to use your workplace mail system to keep other unions from using your mail system, and other benefits. It's a great deal for the union. When contracts are renegotiated, the members of your union get to decide whether or not to accept the union contract, which is generally coupled with automatic recertification of the union until the next contract is put into place. Very few members vote in these matters, very often less than 10%, probably because union members realize that this is just rubber stamping, and so life goes on, with the union having a virtual lock on a group of workers until the end of time. So you get a government job 40 years after the union was certified in your workplace. You don't get to decide whether you want this particular union to represent you or whether you want a union to represent you at all. And you don't get to decide whether you want to pay union dues. You just get to decide whether you want to take the job. Isn't that just a whole lot simpler? Official time. One of the craziest things that our government does is actually pay union officials to work for the union during their paid workday, called official time or release time. Union officials and volunteers are actually paid for time that they spend at work on union matters, and some government employees can even work on union matters all the time for decades without performing any actual work for the government and still get paid their government salary, benefits, and longevity raises. Official time is one of those key provisions that unions demand in their collective bargaining agreement with the government. As James Shirk of the Heritage Foundation explains, official time is a public subsidy for private matters. If federal employees value their union representation, then they should pay for it with their dues. If they do not value that representation enough to pay for it, taxpayers should not subsidize it. But we do. The federal government permits official time under federal law, but it is not required to keep track of how much it costs taxpayers. But the past few years, they checked on it for chuckles and found out that federal employees spent over 3 million hours in 2010 on official time, representing over 1,700 man-years of work and costing taxpayers about $137 million. Our federal, state, and local governments combined pay for over 23 million hours of official time annually, representing around 13,000 man-years of work and costing taxpayers over $1 billion per year. One commentator cleverly noted, official time allows union representatives to conduct routine union affairs and file frivolous grievances during working hours. Like an open bar at a wedding, there's no cost to the guest, but great cumulative cost to the bride's father, also known as the taxpayers. Back in a minute. Thank you. Who is the socialist? He is the man that is spiritual. He's the man that seeks consensus. He's subjective, petty, and small, taking everything in life personally. He's outrageous, boring, and rude. He pretends to be a leader and a change agent. He pretends that he's your friend. He is sly, cunning, and deceptive. He dresses, acts, and speaks like a slob. He is informal and terminally unique. He is childish and pretends that he knows nothing. He has no conscience and pretends that might makes right and that the ends justify the means. He is impulsive and rationalizes his behavior. He is deterministic, blaming others for his mistakes. He is skeptical, demanding that others solve his problems. His unreasonableness and irresponsibility make him a bad role model, bad father, brother, family member, friend, and a bad person, period. So if you think that you can be friends with a socialist, think again. Thank you. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to tune in to the John and Ken Show, which is an excellent example of how true conservatives communicate. It's a radio show that's on KFI AM 640 from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 6 o'clock in the evening, Monday through Friday. And that's Pacific time. So that's an excellent show to listen to. And other than that, until next time, remember to be honest, to be smart, to be beautiful, and to remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.